vpod.ai, your source for information. This podcast is sponsored by StoneFly, your trusted solution provider and advisor in enterprise storage, backup, disaster recovery, hyper-converged in VMware, Hyper-V, Proxmox cluster, AI servers, and public and private cloud. Check out stonefly.com or email your project requirements to sales@stonefly.com. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into something absolutely critical for any business,
Which is?
understanding what your customers actually need, not just what they say, but what they really need.
Right.
And maybe even harder, figuring out if you're truly meeting those needs.
Yeah, that sounds simple on the surface, doesn't it? But getting it right versus getting it wrong is, well, it's often the difference between success and failure. It's fundamental stuff.
Exactly. And we've got this great collection of sources you shared.
Yeah.
Looking at this from a bunch of different angles. So our goal today, our mission is to unpack all of that, pull out the key takeaways, the real gems, and help you get a better handle on how to actually assess those customer needs and then check if you found that crucial product market fit.
All right, let's dive in. So first things first. Why is this whole customer needs thing such a big deal, especially right now?
Well, the material makes a really strong point here. Basically, customer needs are the core problems, the pain points people have that they're actively trying to solve.
That's what drives them to look for solutions in the first place.
Precisely. And the sources break this down into three useful categories. First up are the functional needs.
Right, the practical task, like I need my package delivered by tomorrow, or I need to drill a hole.
Then you got the social needs. This is more about perception.
Yeah.
How does using this product or service make me look to others?
Interesting. Like, does it make me seem smart or successful or, part of a certain group?
Yeah, exactly. And third, the emotional needs. How does the solution make the customer feel?
Okay, so things like reducing anxiety, boosting confidence, providing comfort, maybe even just providing some fun or enjoyment.
Spot on. And what really jumps out from the sources is just how much customer expectations have, skyrocketed. There's a stat mentioned, a very large percentage apparently expect businesses to just know their needs, proactively understand them. That's a high bar.
It really is. But if you can get that deep understanding, functional, social, emotional burden, the payoff is huge.
How so?
Well, it lets you personalize things, create genuinely positive experiences, and that, according to the research cited, directly builds loyalty. People come back.
Right. There was that point about how likely people are to buy again after just one good experience. It's surprisingly high.
It really underlines the impact. It shifts your thinking from just, pushing a product to actually delivering value that clicks on all these different levels.
And speaking of what drives people, the sources also make a useful distinction between a need and a want.
Ah, yeah, that's important. A need is presented as more fundamental, maybe longer term. It's the underlying problem they're grappling with, the thing pushing them to act.
Whereas a want is often more about a specific type of solution, maybe more temporary?
Kind of, yeah. It might be focused on a particular feature or form factor, but maybe doesn't capture the core job they're trying to get done.
Which leads perfectly into the jobs to be done idea.
Yeah.
I love this concept.
Me too. It reframes everything.
Yeah.
Customers don't just buy products. They hire them to do a specific job in their lives.
The classic drill example, right? Nobody wants the drill itself.
No, they want the hole. They're hiring the drill to create the quarter-inch hole they need. The drill is just the means to an end.
Or the meal delivery example used in the sources. You're not just hiring it for the functional job of getting food.
Right. Maybe you're hiring it for the emotional job of less stress after work, or the social job of a nice family meal without the hassle.
It forces you to look past the surface features and really understand the context, the goal, the outcome the customer is striving for.
Absolutely. It's about the progress they're trying to make.
Okay, so we get why it's so crucial to understand these needs, these jobs. But now, the tricky part, how do you actually figure out what they are? Especially when, customers themselves might not be able to explain it well.
Or they might tell you something that isn't quite the real issue.
Exactly. That's where it gets messy.
Yeah, and the sources point this out clearly. Remember the whole faster horses analogy?
Sure. Ask people before cars, they'd say, make my horse faster.
Right. They focused on improving the existing solution, but the gold wasn't the suggestion itself. The gold was the underlying pain they expressed. Transport was slow, inconvenient.
Ah, I see. So their pain point was valuable, even if their proposed solution wasn't the breakthrough.
Precisely. And this flags some common pitfalls material warns against. One is just, throwing an MVP, a minimum viable product out there and waiting for feedback.
Why is that a pitfall? Isn't that standard practice?
It can be, but the risk, especially now, is that if it feels too half-baked, customers might just bounce. They won't stick around to give you feedback, they'll just leave. And you're left wondering why.
Okay. You haven't delivered enough value up front to earn their feedback time.
Exactly. Another big mistake is just directly asking, so what do you want? Or what problems do you have? From some checklist.
Because?
Well, customers aren't usually product designers. They live with the problem, sure, but they're not necessarily equipped to invent the best solution. Plus, asking directly can trigger biases.
Like the spotlight effect.
Yeah, where they might overstate a problem just because you're asking about it. Or confirmation bias creeps in. You hear what you want to hear, confirming your own ideas.
So if direct asking and just launching aren't ideal, what's a better way?
The material offers this really neat idea, framed as the innovator's gift.
Okay, intriguing. What is it?
It suggests that often the most valuable problems to solve, the ones ready for innovation, aren't entirely new. They're hidden in the frustrations, the compromises, the little annoyances people have with the current ways of doing things, the old solutions.
Okay, so you study the pain points of the status quo.
Exactly. Think about how music evolved, which was a great example in the sources. Cassettes to CDs wasn't just about better sound.
Right, it was about the agony of rewinding and fast-forwarding. CDs offered instant track access. That solved a huge pain.
Huge pain. Then CDs to MP3s. Sure, portability was nice, but a big driver was the pain of buying a whole album for just one or two songs you actually liked.
Yeah, I remember that. MP3s let you own individual tracks.
And then MP3s to streaming services? The pain shifted to managing massive libraries, running out of storage, not having everything instantly accessible.
So streaming solved the need for, like, universal on-demand access without the burden of ownership.
You got it. The pattern is, successful innovations often tackled the friction and frustrations inherent in the previous technology. They solved problems people were already feeling, even if they weren't shouting about them.
So the big takeaway here is really study how people use the existing solutions you want to displace.
Yes, your real competition is often just inertia, the good enough way people are getting by now using email for project management, spreadsheets for complex data, whatever it is. Find the cracks in that.
Okay, so how do we study that effectively? The sources laid out some structured methods, right? Look, ask, try.
Yep. Look is all about observation, watching people in their natural habitat, so to speak.
Putting yourself in their world.
Exactly. You're looking for the obvious pain points they might complain about, sure. But even more valuable are the latent ones, the frustrations they've just gotten used to, the awkward steps they take without even thinking about it anymore.
And how do you spot those?
Things like shadowing are powerful. Watching someone actually use a product or go through a process in real time, it reveals the messy reality. And crucially, it reveals workarounds.
Workarounds, like how they MacGyver a solution.
Precisely. When people invent their own little fixes or processes because the existing tool doesn't quite do what they need, that's a massive signal. It screams unmet need.
Like the flashlight app example. People using their phone screens as lights.
Perfect example. That workaround showed developers a clear need, leading to the built-in flashlight feature we all use now. So techniques like being a fly on the wall or shadowing, even using head cameras can uncover these things. Workarounds are often where the opportunities hide.
Okay, that's look. What about ask?
Ask is interviews, but done carefully, not just ticking boxes. The goal is new perspectives. Use open-ended questions. Tell me about a time when, or walk me through how you...
Get them talking, telling stories.
Yes. And involve different people if you can. Structure your interviews so you cover key areas, but avoid leading them. You want their genuine experience, not confirmation of your hypothesis.
Makes sense. And try.
Try is immersion, actually doing what the customer does, experiencing their journey firsthand.
Walk a mile in their shoes, literally sometimes.
If possible, it builds incredible empathy. The example of hospital designers sitting in the hard ER waiting room chairs for hours that gives you insights you just can't get from data. If you can't do the exact thing, mimic it as closely as you can.
Beyond these formal methods, the sources also talked about just listening better day to day, like in customer service.
Absolutely. Active listening. It's about really focusing, understanding not just the words, but the feeling behind them, especially when someone's upset or frustrated.
And asking follow-up questions.
Yeah.
Not just jumping to a solution.
Yeah, showing you're genuinely trying to understand. The point was made that customers often tell you exactly what's wrong, what they need fixed, maybe even what they'd pay more for if you just truly listen.
So slowing down, not rushing calls, maybe offering callbacks that can actually uncover valuable stuff.
Definitely. It builds rapport and gets you past the surface issue.
Okay, and who should we be talking to and observing? Anyone specific?
The sources suggest focusing on the edges. Look at extreme users,
Meaning?
people who use your product or competitors a lot, or people who don't use it at all, or those with really unique situations or needs. Their experiences often highlight stresses or gaps that mainstream users might not encounter yet.
And also early adopters.
Right. Those folks who naturally gravitate towards new things, they're often more articulate about their needs and more willing to give you honest, constructive feedback on early ideas.
Where do you find these people?
Leverage your network, do some targeted outreach cold emails. Can work if done well, engage in online forums or groups where they hang out, maybe even host a small event or workshop.
And when you are listening or observing, what specifically are you listening for?
3 key things mentioned were pet peeves, those little everyday annoyances, struggles, the bigger, more significant difficulties they face, and, as we discussed, workarounds, their clever little hacks.
Those are the signposts to the real problems.
That's the idea. Find those, and you're finding unmet needs. And apparently, you don't always need hundreds of interviews. Patterns often emerge after just, say, 10 or so focused conversations.
Okay, so let's say you've done all this looking, asking, trying. You think you understand a need, you build something. Now what? How do you know if you actually nailed it? How do you validate?
This is where we get into product market fit, or PMF.
Right, PMF. The holy grail for startups, basically.
Pretty much. The sources define it simply. You've built something the market genuinely wants. And they stress, especially early on, finding PMF is arguably the only thing that matters.
Because failing to build something people actually need is a top reason businesses fail, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily bad tech or a weak team.
Exactly. It's building for a non-existent or misunderstood market need.
So how do you know if you have PMF? Is it just a feeling?
It's partly qualitative. Are customers singing your praises? Are they recommending you without being asked? Is usage growing organically? But it's also very much quantitative. You need metrics.
And the sources highlighted a couple of key ones, especially for recurring revenue businesses, but they're good indicators generally. First was customer churn.
The percentage of customers who stop using your service in a given period, like a month or a year.
And point was, even if your total customer count is going up, high churn is bad news.
It's a huge warning sign. It means you're constantly refilling a leaky bucket. The leak shows you're not meeting needs well enough to keep people around long term. Ideal churn varies, but you always want it as low as possible. Often under 10% is cited as a benchmark, depending on the industry.
Then there was MRR churn, monthly recurring revenue churn.
Right. This tracks the actual dollar amount of recurring revenue lost from customers canceling, downgrading, or pausing subscriptions.
Why is that sometimes seen as an even stronger signal?
Because it shows the financial impact of the churn. Losing a few low-paying customers might not hurt MRR much, but losing 1 or 2 high-value customers can crater it. High MRR churn, even if total MRR is growing from new sales, signals a potential mismatch. You might be acquiring customers who aren't finding long-term value. It's crucial to track where that churn comes from, lost customers, downgrades, etc.
So the link back to needs is direct. If your churn numbers are consistently high, it strongly suggests you haven't solved the right problem or haven't solved it well enough.
Exactly. These metrics force you to look beyond just vanity growth numbers and ask why people aren't sticking around.
And understanding the why brings us to another fascinating area the material covered, behavioral economics.
Yeah.
BE.
Yeah, this is super relevant.
Yeah.
BE looks at how psychology, our biases, emotions, mental shortcuts influences the decisions we make. And spoiler, we're often not as rational as we think.
So how does that apply to customer experience, to meeting needs?
It means designing experiences that work with how people actually think and behave, not just how we think they should logically behave. You account for those psychological quirks.
Like loss aversion. The idea that losing something hurts more than gaining something equivalent feels good.
Classic example. That's why free trials ending can feel painful, pushing people to subscribe. Or why highlighting potential losses, don't miss out, can be more motivating than highlighting gains.
The sources gave other examples too, like anchoring bias.
Right, where we latch onto the first piece of info we see. Showing a higher original price next to the sale price anchors our perception of value.
And the decoy effect.
That's adding a third, often slightly less attractive option to make one of the other options seem like a much better deal by comparison. Think pricing tiers.
Clever. And the endowment effect.
That's valuing something more highly simply because we feel ownership or possession of it. Again, free trials tap into this. Once you've had Prime Video access for a month, giving it up feels like a loss.
And framing how you present the same information matters hugely.
Absolutely. 95% fat-free versus 5% fat. Same data, totally different emotional reaction.
So companies are consciously using these principles.
All the time. Creating urgency with limited time offers uses scarcity and loss aversion. Personalizing recommendations uses familiarity and reduces cognitive load. Setting sensible defaults uses choice architecture to gently guide users.
Amazon with its Prime trial and was pricing. Apple with scarcity tactics for launches and premium pricing.
Exactly. But it's not just tech. Retail layouts guide impulse buys. B2B sales strategies work to overcome the status quo bias in organizations. Loyalty programs use tiers and points expiration to keep you engaged.
And how do you measure if these BE strategies are actually working?
You track your core KPIs, conversion rates, satisfaction scores like CSAT or NPS. You run A/B tests comparing different approaches, and you keep gathering that qualitative feedback. Why did people respond that way?
Okay, so wrapping this all together, the big message seems to be that understanding needs and crafting the experience isn't a one-and-done thing.
Not at all. It has to be continuous. You're always learning, always refining.
Taking all those insights from watching, asking, trying, looking at the data, and actually synthesizing them is key. Not just collecting data points, but seeing the patterns.
Right, moving beyond assumptions to the core challenges.
And then, crucially, acting on it. All the listening in the world doesn't help if you don't actually fix the problem or build the solution.
True. And as we get better at using things like behavioral economics, the ethical considerations become really important too.
Using these powerful tools responsibly, you mean?
Yeah. Balancing persuasion with transparency and respect. Building trust, not just manipulating clicks or purchases.
Looking ahead, the sources touched on AI and machine learning, making this even more sophisticated.
Seems inevitable. Potentially enabling hyper-personalization and applying BE insights at an incredibly granular level. Understanding those emotional drivers, those micro moments of need, will likely be key.
So the ultimate goal isn't just making things work, but making them delightful, creating real loyalty.
That seems to be the end game, according to this material. Building experiences that resonate deeply.
Which brings us to a final thought, something to chew on. With all these tools, the data, the AI, the behavioral tricks, where does that really new idea, that disruptive innovation, still come from? Thinking back to that innovator's gift, is it possible that the richest source is still just carefully observing those small, maybe illogical, deeply human things? The pet peeves, the struggles, the weird workarounds people invent when faced with imperfect solutions.
Are those the subtle signals that even the smartest AI might miss? The truly human friction points?
Maybe. Something to keep an eye out for as you listen differently.
Definitely food for thought.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us. We really hope you've picked up some valuable ideas about the art and science of figuring out what customers truly need.
Go put some of it into practice.
vpod.ai, your source for information. This podcast is sponsored by StoneFly, your trusted solution provider and advisor in enterprise storage, backup, disaster recovery, hyperconverged in VMware, Hyper-V, Proxmox cluster, AI servers, and public and private cloud. Check out stonefly.com or email your project requirements to sales@stonefly.com.